Initiating moisture.
Welcome to the Moist Meter. Today we're looking at Code Vein, otherwise known as Anime Souls, Weeb Souls, Waifu Souls. It has many different titles, but one thing it definitely is a very, very anime Dark Souls inspired game. Nothing wrong with that. I think the game overall is very fun, so let's rumble. The biggest difference between this title and others in the genre is its emphasis on story. Most games that fall into this really put not much focus on a story. Yeah, they're there, and they're definitely good if you go out of your way to find the story elements, but this one is much more about a narrative that you follow, meeting characters developing, solving mysteries, and it's a lot of fun. Even though oftentimes it's extremely cheesy, it's not a bad thing, but this is genuinely some of the most anime shit I have ever seen in my life. There's a main character named Yakumo, and every time he even so much as hears a fart, he goes into this long monologue about what his friends mean to him. I shit you not, there's a scene where he takes out an onigiri, takes a bite of it, and then says, "Oh, I see you saw me eat an onigiri. Well, I'm not exactly hungry, but it reminds me of my friends. My friends and I used to love eating these together, and there's not a goddamn thing on this planet I wouldn't do for my friends. I'd go to hell and back for my friends, then back to hell if they wanted me to. I'd stay in hell and jerk off in hell if my friends wanted me to. My friends mean everything to me. Friendship. The power of friendship." I can see why that would be off-putting to a lot of people who don't want to hear ramblings about the power of friendship, and there's a lot of big anime titties that jiggle around a lot. So if you're really not into that whole generic anime plotline dialogue and style, then there's not a lot here for you narratively. But if you don't mind the cheesiness and you don't mind some really lackluster voice acting in a lot of points in this game, it's a lot of fun. I think the story's well written and it's interesting and it keeps you invested in the characters. But you can skip the dialogue, you can skip the whole story if you want to, just kind of mash start through it like you're watching a RuneScape cutscene, you're just fucking hammering space to get through it. And that's fine, because the gameplay is very fun, so if you really just care about good Souls-like gameplay, Code Vein offers that for sure. There's a decent amount of build diversity, but they all kind of boil down to 3 main weapons and 3 main ways of playing. There's a bayonet, which allows you to shoot, and it's best for casting. There's giant 2-handed swords and hammers, which is good if you want to do some strength stuff. And then there's one-handed weapons as well if you're going for more dexterity-based, dodging around-based shit. When it comes to actually fighting enemies, the combat itself isn't that deep, and most of the abilities kind of function in the same manner. Though there are obvious differences between them, you'll kind of find yourself using the same 3 abilities depending on what kind of build you want to do. So the combat itself in terms of fighting isn't that deep. There's not really a lot of combos or a combo system or anything like that. But where it gets deep is when it comes to how you want to build your character, with the blood codes, the blood veils kind of functioning as your armor and a complement to your blood codes kind of functioning as the base for what you want to go. For example, tanking, you'd most likely want something with Atlas, maybe even Fighter. There's just a lot of blood codes that offer different statistical benefits, different resistances, different perks, and they come with their own set of gifts. Now, gifts in this game are the abilities, and if you master an ability, you can use it even without the corresponding blood codes, so you can constantly have different abilities on different blood codes that weren't native to it. And your blood veil, like I said, is basically your armor with your defensive stats as well as some offensive scaling bonuses. So it gets deep when it comes to min-maxing your character and making a build that you're happy with. However, the combat itself is kind of lacking in depth when you're actually fighting mobs. There's really just not a whole lot of depth to it, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, because what it does well enough in its execution to make it fun. I never found myself bored during a fight. The only times I found myself a little underwhelmed is during the boss fights, because these bosses have no mechanical depth to them whatsoever. You could give the controller to your dog and just have your dog hammer on it and probably beat one of the bosses. The bosses aren't overly different from just a normal enemy. They have basically the same 3-attack move chain, they have a teleport slash, and that's about it. They just have more health. They have about as much mechanical depth as fighting a RuneScape goblin in Lumbridge. I just don't understand why, in a game that has stakes as high as this does narratively, they'd have the bosses be so forgettable. There's never a time where you're struggling against a boss because you have a companion with you at all times, and the companions are way too strong. I'd recommend playing this game without companions if you want an actual difficult experience, because with companions, this is the easiest Souls-like game that's ever been made by a mile. And that's not bad, because mainly I think the game puts a bigger emphasis on its story than its challenge. But if you are looking for a challenge, turn that off. But the point I'm making with the bosses is, it's just like fighting a normal enemy in the wild. It's just not very fun. In the boss design, I think they're aesthetically cool. I think they look nice. But I would at least like their attacks and the battle itself to have a little more depth than just dodge 3 times, slap in the back 3 times, then they're staggered, they go down on one knee like they're praying, and then you just fucking hammer them and take their lunch money and poke them in the ass with your sword. It's just the same thing repeated all the way up until the last boss. The last boss is the only one that even has a second phase. It's just really underwhelming with the bosses. And that also extends to its common enemies as well, because there's really only 4 enemies in this entire game that are repeated throughout the entire 15-hour journey. No matter what zone you visit, the zones look nice and they're environmentally different and fun looking, but all of the enemies in there are the same 4 enemies you've been fighting since the tutorial, just recolored. And that's so stupid. I hate that. I like when the games keep enemy variety fresh, so that way you're constantly having to change up how you attack a battle and, get by an encounter. Here, it's always the same enemies in every zone, dropped in groups of 2 that are just kind of planted right in front of you with no care to enemy placement whatsoever, and you just fucking slash through them. There's more variety in Tetris blocks than there are in enemies in this 15-hour adventure. It's just really upsetting to just keep fighting the same enemies over and over and over again. I was really hoping that would evolve, but it doesn't. Luckily, the combat is fun, so when you're just mowing this shit down, it at least feels satisfying, albeit disappointing because you've already killed 1,000 of these things by now. But one thing I really like about this game is the soundtrack. I think the score to this game is absolutely beautiful. Although they repeat the songs a lot throughout the story, that's kind of to be expected. And they play the same song every time you visit a vestige, which in this game is a memory of a character in the universe, and you're getting more about their backstory. I always found myself getting really invested in that time thanks to the music, complementing the story you're getting in the memory. And it's also really beautiful walking around the memory, because it's set up in such a surreal and abstract way, and I just thought it was really cute, and I enjoyed that. And at no point in this game did I ever find the music to be lackluster or forgettable. The music is a really strong point in this game, in my opinion. Another thing a lot of people might like is the ability to co-op the game. You can invite other players, your friends, in to play along with you, and then you have another player and a companion, so then you're just gangbanging everything. And that's a nice chaotic clusterfuck when you have that going on. But again, it takes away the challenge, whatever semblance of a challenge existed before you bring in your friend anyway. It's just fun to have that ability to just co-op these kind of games. Now, while I think the game is pretty flawed on a technical level and there's a lot of things I feel it definitely could have done better, I really did find myself enjoying the game a lot. I really enjoyed the charm of the characters in the universe and the story. I loved the unapologetically anime storyline and writing and just feel the game as a whole. And like I said, the combat never got tiresome. I did try and switch around builds a few times, although I always settled on going back to just a giant two-handed approach. It just seemed like the most efficient way. But I really do think this is a good game, not a great game. So plugging this into the moist meter, I'm giving Code Vein a nice 70%. I think it's a fun game with a really interesting story to offer, albeit one that I think could put people off of it big time. But even if you disregard the story, I think a lot of people will like toying around with the builds and finding everything, and then just finding a playstyle that suits you best for the combat. Even though the combat's not hard, it's fun to experiment with. And just overall, I think it was a fun game. That's about it. So yeah.